are you familiar with the financial model profit first?
Yeah, as soon as you have an absentee owner, like you got to have someone that's guarding the bottom line every day. And so that's why I'm a big fan of incentivizing a general manager or anyone that's really responsible in leadership role based upon bottom line net profits or distributable cash, is because like that's all I care about as someone who's not there every day. And so if you have mid-level managers and you're there every day, you can guard the bottom line. But as soon as you're gone, you want to incentivize people based upon that because that's all you really care about.
What you just said there sounds like it's very lends itself to people that are actually selling the job and doing the job, as opposed to a lot of companies that we speak with who have salespeople that'll sell the job and technicians that'll actually do the job. Mike, welcome to the Sideshed podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Matt. I appreciate it.
Good to have you, mate. All the way from Washington State.
Yes, sir. I know. I was just telling you before the show, but my mom's from over in Australia. I've been there a few times on the east side of where you're at, but then she was from Perth. That's where she was born. So
okay. Yeah, great. So you got a bit of Aussie blood in you. Good to hear.
Exactly.
Are you a Seattle Mariners fan?
Hey, yeah. Yeah, raised doing a lot of baseball, so definitely that's the local team.
Nice. Yeah, I'm sadly a tragic Toronto Blue Jays fan, which sucks for us at the moment. Anyway. Mate, we're here to talk today a bit about your story, actually. We've got a couple of episodes which we've lined up. One of them we're going to be talking about the power of performance pay. As I was mentioning to you offline, it's a pretty good timing, actually, because I've had a lot of clients lately that are kind of going down that path where they're wanting to remunerate team members and things like that on a performance basis. So super keen to dive deep into that one. And then we're going to touch on leveraging social media to grow a business. And again, this is something that's kind of close to home for us as an agency. And drawing that line between being productive with social media and just ticking the box of doing social media, which doesn't really have a defined outcome. I'd really love to explore some of your concepts around that and see where we align. But before we jump into that, let us know a bit about who you are and what you do and where you're from and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, so like the kind of the short story is I started mowing grass when I was 11 years old, just pushing a lawnmower around my neighborhood with my brother. We did that to basically pay our way through college. I started college when I was really young. So I started college when I was 13. I wanted to become a medical doctor. So I kind of figured I needed to jump on it. I kind of saw that as my way out. My family never had money, never had business. They had never gone to school in terms of college. And so kind of seeing that as my way out was the plan. So used lawn mowing to pay my way through college. When I was 18, I was going to go to medical school and ended up changing my mind after doing a lot of shadowing here in the US and just seeing, okay, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of paperwork. I'm going to do the same 4 or 5 procedures if I go into surgery for the next 40 years of my career. Didn't really want to do that. So I did the only thing I knew how to do, and that was, go start a lawn care business. So that's when I started Augusta Lawn Care, and that was 10 years ago. And then 5 years into that, we started franchising. So we now have 155 locations, US, Canada, and actually just started our first location over in Australia in Box Hill. And so that's kind of been the story arc of it.
No way. That's amazing. So were you one of those genius Doogie Howser children growing up, skipping grades?
I was called that. I had to look that up a couple of times once that reference was brought up. It's so old.
I'm sure my age. Okay, thanks very much. Oh, that's unreal, man. Yeah, franchising, interesting. Yeah, because there's quite a large franchise model over here, which stemmed all from lawn care, Jim's Mowing, which no doubt you're familiar with. They've sort of branched into all different other services and things like that now. How was that journey? I know we're not here to talk about that, but I'd be curious to see how that journey's been for you.
Yeah, like it's definitely a different business model. It's certainly, the advantages of franchising is you use other people's capital to scale. So, if you had to start your own location, you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to get each one off the ground. You might be able to start one a year. Whereas with franchising, other people putting their capital into it for a royalty or a flat fee like we have, they're going to be able to then use their capital to start in the brand. So I think everyone thinks that it's like, oh, I start this legal document and I go sell franchises and it's easy. It's not that way. The vast majority of or not just home services, but like any franchisor, the failure rate is extremely high. And the reason for that is most of the time they're not super profitable until after 100 locations. And so the vast majority of franchisors don't get to 100 plus locations. And the reason it's not profitable until 100 is if you're going to support the owners that buy into your system, the franchisees, at the extent that you need to, you got to put so much capital in, and you don't see that money out until you many times get over 100 locations. So for example, like last year in the US, there was over 400 franchisors that were started. They got their franchise documents, their franchise agreement, franchise disclosure document, operating agreement. For $100,000, you can basically become a franchisor. The vast majority of those will not get above 10 locations, and the vast majority of them will go out of business. And so franchising kind of gets a bad name, mostly because there's so many people that start, but very few who actually stick around. And that's kind of the franchising 101.
And in your opinion, what's the key to the success of a franchise in the space of longevity and sustainability?
Ultimately caring for the owners, doing what's right for them at every turn of the road, making sure that decisions being made are actually impacting their customers, and they're like looking at their unit economics. Like if they're not making enough money, it doesn't matter how good you are at selling franchises, you will eventually fail. And so a lot of times when private equity gets involved, it can dilute the brand or the decision-making power of the founder when it comes to what's in the best interest of the franchisees and the owners. Once that North Star has been lost, I think that's when usually is the first steps to decline for the franchise.
Well, and a slight segue still, but what's the difference between the franchise model and the licensee model?
Yeah, so essentially, depending on Australia, Canada, US, there's slight differences, but in essence, think of franchising as you have you take actually the brand of the franchisor on. So licensing, for example, you can take certain concepts, marketing, certain templates. It's more almost like a business opportunity. You don't have to change your name. You don't have to, it's usually not a long-term agreement. It's usually like a monthly agreement or an annual agreement. A franchise is much more like we are partners in on this. There's usually much higher amounts of capital that are going to be invested, and it's a 10-year agreement or 20-year agreement in terms of the franchise. So in the US, at least, a lot more legislation is being passed to move licensing towards franchising. So it's like, do you take on the name of the franchise? Do you there's several requirements they have, but it's becoming more and more where they don't want licensees, because licensing reduces the legal obligation of the franchisor. And there's a lot of people that have been burnt because of licensing, when in reality it's some sort of scheme. And so unfortunately, there's a lot of bad actors in this whole world, but there is some laws being passed to really move licensing much more towards the franchise model.
It's funny over here because I think it's going the other way. Like I know a lot of franchises that have moved into the licensing route, and maybe that's due to some of the
they've gone the opposite direction. Yeah, they got more relaxed on the licensing side, whereas here they're going almost against licensing, because it used to be as long as you did not change your name, you could be you could go under licensing.
Right.
Whereas now, even if you don't change your name, if you do certain things like requiring a franchisee to do something, they can say that's franchise. And so they're trying to, I think, put more people in that bucket.
Even a lot of those licensing businesses over here or groups, a shout out to my buddy Luke, who started up Level Group over here, which is doing really well. But they're sort of home service, but they're a group. They're not a franchise. They're not a license model. They're a group. But I think they still fall under the franchise model when it comes to the government tax or whatever. I can't remember. Whatever the business model is, I think it's still deemed franchise. He was telling me, or something like that.
Yeah, I was thinking of it as you have like core, you have like content, you have course, you have mastermind, then you have like license or business opportunity, then licensing, then franchise. And that scale is essentially how much more legally are you intertwined with the operator of the system.
Sure. And so are you the CEO? Is your role to sort of manage the whole shebang?
Yep. So I'm the founder of Augusta, and then we also have a Copilot CRM in terms of software. And so both of those, yes.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Well, good on you, man. That's unreal. So anyway, we're here today to talk about the power of pay performance. again, a topic that I think a lot of the listeners are very interested in, but unsure about how to deliver on. So I'm sure this will be very well received. I guess, like, do you want to sum this up as to what we're kind of going to be talking about here, and just the general dynamic before we start diving deep into some of the further details?
Yeah, like the 30,000 foot view, in my opinion, for P4P or pay for performance is the harder you work, the more money you make. And you're like, well, I want to know more. How do that's the nuts and bolts? Okay, well, you get a percentage of all the labor revenue that you earn for the business. The employee makes that. And so the harder you work, the more money you make. That's really at a 30,000 foot view. And then everyone starts questioning, okay, well, if I pay people to go faster, that means they're going to have lower quality. So there's so many different aspects of like, well, why could it not work, that we have to kind of figure out in terms of, okay, what happens if you have a trainer? What happens if you have a really skilled person with a brand new employee? What happens if one of them makes a mistake and the other one doesn't? Who has to go back to the property? What happens if they make a damage case? There's all these different scenarios why we always thought performance pay wouldn't work, but just like figuring out one by one all those little kinks and then making a system where you could actually pay people more if they worked hard and if they worked, had the skills to do so. And it's a pure meritocracy. It's like, it's not based upon who knows the boss. It's not based upon who works hard in front of the boss or plays golf with the boss on the weekend or has been around the longest. It's like who actually produces the most revenue for the business.
Sure. I'm really keen to, like, over the years, especially when I was back, doing working as a plumber many years ago, we went to a lot of these training programs and people that were, like, with a large emphasis on the sales side of things. And essentially, I guess in alignment with what you're saying there, it's all how can you sell more in order to make more based on incentives and that kind of carry on. And one of the big obstacles that I know a lot of the business owners were facing at that point in time was the control around ethical selling with that model, and making sure that you've got, and truthfully, we've been in this path ourselves, even, where we've got like salespeople in positions and they're incentivized to sell, more. And there's it's always been a bit of a battle trying to define like the right fit for the customer kind of thing,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like a lot of times P4P, we see it mostly being used where it is labors, not necessarily the sales side. And so if the technician is also doing upsells, for example, I would probably have some sort of other incentive alongside P4P, because P4P is really an incentivizing of the efficiency of labor. So we're always tracking budget hours divided by clock hours. That's our efficiency score. And so that's really what's incentivizing. If you're adding sales on top of that, you can. So we have, like, for example, if our crew does get an upsell or they get an extra sale to the customer, they do get incentives or bonuses on top of that. But usually the system we have for P4P is mostly for the labor themselves, not salespeople, typically.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. I think from my, I recently did a recording with a fellow as well, and we're talking about like scheduled maintenance programs, and I suppose verticals such as lawn care, which are very conducive to recurring work. And I think the general consensus is when people are brought into these, or team members are brought into these companies, they need to be trained to be looking for problems. I mean, truthfully, everyone kind of does, but I think this probably ties into what you're saying there about, and I'm asking this question because I'm keen to hear what your take is on how you train your franchisees in the space of looking for problems. And is it like a checklist that you deploy, that they deploy, where they go through each job and they're like, okay, you like make sure you offer or at least go around the property and look for hedges that could be trimmed, or trees that need pruning, or like those kind of things as sort of the starting point when they get to a job. Is that kind of your experience?
Yeah, we're always trying to first off incentivize. So for our crew out in the field, they usually won't talk to the customer, but they are looking, to your point, they're the eyes on the property trying to find upsells. What are the opportunities to cross-sell or upsell the customer? And so we just try to use technology to make sure that we just like make it as simple as possible for them to be able to get that information to the office or the customer. And so, for example, like in Copilot, what we do is we just have usually 3 to 4 services that they can choose from in a drop-down. And if they click on, okay, I'm mowing, this person needs a bush trimming, they'd go to the drop down, I want bush trimming. Now, based on the settings, I can either have a text or email go to the customer directly and ask, hey, we are on your property, looks like you need bush trimming, click this button, we'll give you an estimate. Or it can just go to the dispatcher, and the dispatcher can send that out if they so choose. But that's really our focus, is like, how do we grease every single opportunity, because we are on the property every week, every 2 weeks. And so it's not frequent that there's going to be a huge property cleanup needed or a big bush trimming, but we're always looking out for those opportunities, and then we're tracking those and incentivizing the crew to actually keep their eyes peeled for those sort of upsells.
Yeah, I know, especially with some colleagues of mine over the years that have been, they've fallen on the wrong end of the sword with this one, in the space of like unethical selling. They've ended up on, in the media, and one of them, well, actually two of them have ended up. One of them lost the business, and the other one had to sort of end up rebranding because of it. So it was a very fine line for them with. And I guess the lesson that they learned there was really no, like, they needed to have tighter boundaries around, the guys out on site, what, within what way they can operate in the space of, okay, well, this is the right way to go about it. What you're doing right now is not the right way. And I think as well, from memory, talking to one of my colleagues, like he just really, I think, is what you're talking about, that model, is it kind of flat rate? Is it kind of like, presenting the price up front for the customer to agree on before you do anything? That kind of...
Essentially, yeah. Whether it be a project or even recurring, there's usually a set price that's based upon the amount of hours that we're going to be spending on the property. Now, to your point, I think it's really important when it comes to P4P to have both the quantity and quality aspect of compensation. And so if you just give them a commission, for example, on every sale or how much their revenue they produce, they're going to, like, whatever you incentivize is going to happen. And so they're going to work faster. Or in this case, if you're doing sales and installation, for example, with like plumbing or HVAC, et cetera, then yeah, they're going to sell more. They are. Now, will it become ethical should really come back to, is it serving the customer? And so I would always have that second countermeasure of quality. So for us, it's like there's callbacks, there's yellow slips, we call them. There is damage cases. The customer complains if we lose a customer over their performance. And I would say the same thing when it comes to something like, even like sales, is like, what's the customer satisfaction? Like, if the customer is being surveyed and it's a positive experience for them, I think that's ethical to sell them as much as possible. I'm solving as many problems as I possibly can, and in doing so, am serving the customer more. And so now, if the customer's unhappy and I've been selling them all this stuff, now it becomes, to your point, somewhat of an unethical issue.
Yeah, and I think the model really, I think, lends itself in the space of obligation when you out, like, and this is what I'm trying to communicate to a lot of our clients that are in the electrical space doing solar and things like that. Like, there's really, and I'll give you a prime example of this in a second to back it up, but there's really like an obligation from the business perspective when you're going out to a project to do a job. Like, you have an obligation to be looking for problems elsewhere, especially in the instance where it has a direct reflect or in some way impacts the project that you plan on doing. So the example is, like, we've got a lot of clients that do solar installations, solar electrical. So they'll go put panels on roofs and they'll install battery units and all that kind of stuff, which is huge over here. But then, if they don't have that, if their technicians out on site, like if you send the solar team out to put the solar on, that's what they're going to do. Like, typically, right? So they need to make sure they've got, like, a process in place where, if they need to go out, okay, well, we need to check the switchboard here, because if we go and install this system and the switchboard doesn't keep up, then we're going to have to install a new, then it's not going to work, like, as an example, right? So there's kind of this obligation where, and that it is in the customer's interest, because they need to know that up front. Otherwise, they're going to get hit with this mandatory upsell down the line, which is not going to leave a great taste in anyone's mouth. So
absolutely.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to, or my observation of it is, it's purely like communication, and we're seeing that the best advantages that we have, especially like when we work with clients and we're taking them through the different stages of like, we have these different stages that we built out within our process, and one stage, we might solve a lead problem, which then 100% of the time, the next stage that needs to be solved is the sales process needs evolution and so on and so forth, right? Like it's like clockwork every time it sort of happens, but like helping them understand what that process is really important. And then helping them, like while they're in those situations, okay, well now it looks like you're having issues closing these jobs or you're getting too many callbacks or whatever it might be. Like how do you turn screws at the various stages? And what we're finding is if you have like a process that's documented, it gives them something to mold and shape and, and evolve, if you want to call it that. Whereas previously in most cases, it's kind of like just rock up and remember what you do and do it, but you so often miss things it's not really a system at that point. It's just kind of like you're just going on muscle memory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's dive into some of this nitty gritty on how we can actually structure some of these P4Ps for technicians and by the way, is it just technicians?
Yeah, usually when it comes to pay for performance in our life, it is mostly technicians. Now, when it comes to like a general manager or an estimator, typically we're going to be doing something more along the lines of profit sharing or giving them some sort of incentive based on revenue. But usually it is for technicians is like the focus, and really to try to minimize the amount of even just micromanagement. Like the number one thing you can do to a high performing team member that's a technician is micromanage them. And the second thing is put them with a B player. And so with pay for performance, we weed out B players because they don't like the system, simply because the harder you work, the more money you make. Therefore, they don't make a lot of money. And so we weed those people out. However, the highest performers love the system because they're tired of working with those type of people, and they're tired of bosses that are looking over their shoulder, tracking their truck, making videos of them, walking up with them on job sites and trying to like sneak on them. When it comes to pay for performance, if they're getting paid a percentage of the labor revenue they make for the business, I don't care if they're on their phone. If I see them on their phone or at a gas station, it's like, look, it's up to them. Like if they want to work harder, they'll make more money. If they don't want to work harder, that's fine. That's up to them. And so there's less micromanagement required when you have a performance-based system in place.
So you've touched on something there, which I'd kind of like to expand further into, because I know this is also a conversation that's recently come up with clients of ours in the space of performance pay for management and how that differs then from the performance pay, as you mentioned, for the technicians and the field technicians. And I also have a couple of colleagues that have performance pay models in place for their CSRs, like people that actually taken the calls of dispatching. And that's based on, I believe, and I'm paraphrasing here, so maybe I'll cock it up, but I'm pretty sure it's to do with them, the discovery calls, like how the information they're getting from the discovery call, which is then preparing the technician for the job, so on and so forth. So I'd love to hear so you would have way more experience with this than me, so I'd love to hear your insight on that.
Yeah, like we have a lot of experience on the kind of like sub 2 million revenue marker. So if you're going way above that, this probably won't be super relevant. But usually what we're looking at is like, hey, there's 3 different divisions of the business: sales, operations, and admin. And so my goal is to be able to have a general manager that can either A, juggle all 3 and usually stay around $800,000 or less in annual revenue, or B, I am going to scale to 1.5 or more and get a head of ops, a head of sales, and a head of admin or an office manager. And so doing that allows me to be able to scale the business if I would like to, but it also changes the way I compensate, because if I have a general manager who's responsible for basically everything inside the business, I'm usually going to give them a piece of the profits. And I'll give up to 35% of my profits to a general manager in terms of profit sharing. And that depends if they started early with me or do they start later. Maybe they only get 10%. If the business has been in business for 10 years, it's super profitable already, and I'm giving a location to a general manager, my profit sharing is going to look much more along the lines of 10% per quarter versus 30, 35, 40% if I'm starting brand new with a general manager, and they kind of have to hold their breath for a year while that location ramps up and gets to profitability. So usually general managers is where we kind of focus on. But then if you start having like a head of operations and then as well as like an office manager, you might do something similar where I want them to be incentivized based on the bottom line, especially if you're going to be an absentee owner. And so for like us, I have multiple locations myself that I own. I'm never there. I don't do the hiring. I don't do any of the marketing. I need that completely managed without me. And so I'm going to have massive incentives around the bottom line, because that's all I care about. I just want distributions. And so some people actually, and we kind of have 2 different ways of doing the profit sharing. profit sharing can be a little bit deceptive because you can do it where if you're buying trucks and equipment, for example, they don't show up on the profit and loss statement. They're on the balance sheet. And so you can actually be very cash poor, but be running a very profitable business on a P&L. And so if you want to avoid that, one thing you can do is just do distributable cash as the mechanism for profit sharing. In other words, when I take $50,000 out of the bank and it goes into my bank account, you get a percentage of it. And so that's really worked well for some of our locations too, especially once they're in profit mode, they're more stable in terms of their revenues. They're not trying to grow. That's been super beneficial because now the incentive of the general manager is directly aligned with that of the absentee owner, which is I want distributions. I want money out of this business. I want net free cash flow in my pocket, and you're going to get a piece of all of that.
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, so typically with distributable cash, what we do is we'll do the last 3 months of revenue and take the average of it. So for example, let's just say last month I did 80,000. The month before that I did 100,000. The month before that I did 120,000. Well, the average of those 3 months would be 100,000. That is then going to be the deposit or the threshold of cash that's required in the bank. Anything above $100,000 at the end of the quarter is going to be considered distributable cash. So now let's just say there's $140,000 in the bank account at the end of the quarter. The average is 100 grand for the past 3 months of revenue. Anything above 100,000 is distributable cash. That means there's $40,000 that's going to be split up and distributed based upon whatever agreement we have in place. So let's just say I have 50%, my regional manager has 15%, and my GM has 35%. There's like your cut of the 40 grand. That's distributable cash.
I understand. Okay. And so that's when structuring a business in that way, it's important, I suppose, that you have that baseline defined. So the business needs to be making this much, and anything above and beyond is an incentive.
Because as the business grows, you're going to need more working capital, right? So if the business is now 200,000 annual revenue, I don't want to have a locked-in dollar amount as working capital. And the distinguishing factor of what distributable cash is, it needs to evolve with the business.
So then, how would you define that in the instance where you do, like the example you gave, where you've got like 100 grand sort of as the entry level, whatever
Threshold.
The threshold, sorry, yeah, and then that number changes as the business grows due to new staff you need and expenses and marketing costs and whatever it might be. How do you evolve that threshold?
Yep, because that threshold is determined by the quarter's average monthly revenue. So as the business grows and all those other expenses grow, that threshold will go up. So if next year I did 150, 200, and 250,000 in monthly revenue in that quarter, the threshold will now go to 200,000.
Oh, I understand. So that's really defined from quarter to the next quarter based on, okay.
You got it.
Gotcha. So if okay, I understand. That makes sense. Interesting. Yeah, that's real. I've never heard that before. That's really cool.
It's also a really helpful thing I've found with partnerships, because if you have an equity split, sometimes like, well, how do we take cash out of the business? Just set a deposit where anything over this dollar amount is what most people will do. But the problem with that is it becomes antiquated as the business grows. So just take an average of the last 3 months of revenue, for example, or if you want to be more conservative, you could say 150% of the average monthly revenue, and then just set that threshold. So as the business grows, there's working capital, but you know exactly what money is coming out of the business.
Are you familiar with the financial model Profit First?
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, it's been a game changer for us, and we highly recommend it to client. I mean, we're not accountants by any measure, but I think it's perhaps not the same as what you're saying, but just making sure that you have those allowances and you have those accounts defined for that so that you don't get to the point after 3 months where you're like, we've got no money in the bank. and I think that's the other thing I've seen in the past too, especially with like incentivizing based on like profits. Like at the end of the month, you might not have any profits. You might have bought a new truck. Like there may be no like all those expenses. Not so much profits, but like incentivizing on the gross revenue. Where you're like, right. Well, we spent all the money because we needed to buy all these things. We need to hire a new team and all this kind of carrot. We had a Christmas party, which isn't really fair for the team member, But yeah, I like that.
Yeah, as soon as you have an absentee owner, like you got to have someone that's guarding the bottom line every day. And so that's why I'm a big fan of incentivizing a general manager or anyone that's really responsible in leadership role based upon bottom line net profits or distributable cash, is because like that's all I care about as someone who's not there every day. And so if you have mid-level managers and you're there every day, you can guard the bottom line. But as soon as you're gone, you want to incentivize people based on that because that's all you really care about.
You said bottom line net or bottom line gross?
Net.
Oh, okay.
Because if I'm an absentee owner and I'm doing, say, multiple locations, or I'm trying to never show up to the business, the only reason I really have that business is to be able to take net free cash flow out of that business and put it in my pocket. And so if I can incentivize the manager, the leader, to think the same way I would as if I was there, which is cut costs, not have the, maybe we don't need fancy trucks. Maybe we'll get a little smaller truck. Maybe this truck will last an extra year because I don't need that much. I don't want that expense coming out of my bottom line profit. And so I want them always thinking about the same way I, as the owner, am being compensated, which is most of the time distributions are net free cash flow.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Interesting. Okay. So, and then moving along into the technicians, how do you see that working well?
Yeah, so what we usually do is just give them a percentage of labor revenue. And so let's just say there is a $10,000 job. You assume that $2,000 of that is materials, $8,000 of that is labor. So right off the get, they're getting a percentage of that labor. Let's just call it, let's do 33%. So 1/3 of all labor revenue they're going to get in the form of their wages. That means before the job starts, they already know they're making 33% of $8,000 no matter what happens. If they get the job done in 3 days, great. If it takes them 6 days, same exact pay. And so it's essentially the same way the owner is getting paid, now the employee gets paid. Now we make sure they have base pay. In other words, even if they have a horrible job that goes bad, even if they have a bad day, even if something crazy happens, we're always clocking their hours and making sure they make at least a certain base pay, and we track overtime. So we're always tracking that. We're making sure we're compliant there. But anything between that and then their pay for performance, that delta is just all bonus on their paycheck. And that's up to them. Like if they want that, go for it. If not, you're probably gonna hit base pay consistently. And if you do that consistently enough, we're probably gonna let you go.
Sure. Yeah. That, what you just said there sounds like it's very lends itself to people that are actually selling the job and doing the job, as opposed to a lot of companies that we speak with who have salespeople that'll sell the job and technicians that'll actually do the job.
Yeah, so this is a good point. So in the perfect world, yes, you'd have everyone be able to sell and actually install the work, because in that sense, they are incentivized to make sure they close enough jobs to stay busy. But if they sell too many jobs at a low price, now they're also going to get lower wages. That being said, if, say from something like lawn care, landscaping, we don't usually have technicians doing the sales. And so they've got to rely on their estimator or their salesperson or their general manager having an incentive structure that ensures that there is enough budget hours on the jobs. There is enough labor revenue being allocated. Because if not, and if they're always seeing base pay, you lose your crew. Because all of a sudden they think this is a bunch of nonsense. And so accuracy of budgeted hours or accuracy of your estimates is extremely important to do P4P. If you're jumping into it to P4P like, it sounds great, but you have no idea how to estimate, it's not accurate, you don't have any sort of budgeted hours, you're never going to be able to win the confidence of your team, because they'll give you, grace on 1 out of 20 jobs just kind of go south. Like you put 40 budget hours, it takes 60 because something crazy happens, they didn't see it happening. But if that happens, 1 out of 2 jobs, you're way off on your budget hours, you're way off on the pricing of the job, and they can't make above base pay on P4P, you lose their confidence. And eventually they'll vote with their feet and they'll leave. And so you're always walking that tightrope to your point of like, you've got to gain the trust of the team, but you've also got to keep the prices low enough to get the job sold. And so we actually don't see a huge amount of friction between when the estimators are separate and the salespeople are separate from the technicians, because most of the time, if the salespeople are trying to screw them over, the general manager, whoever's selling the job tries to screw over the crew, they'll leave, they'll bounce. Because they'll be able to see very quickly. They'll be able to see right in the numbers, like, they always are underbidding my jobs. There's no way I can make above base pay. This is a scam, and they'll bounce. And so our goal is always to make sure they're above base pay. The only reason they should be under base pay or like at hitting base pay is they're an underperformer. So if 90% or more of the team is above base pay, I know this, like, the estimates are going out, the estimates are being accurate, and as long as my close ratio is in line with what my projections are, I'm okay with it.
And I guess the next question would be making sure and how you would structure the scenario. Because I know this, I've seen this animosity in businesses that I've worked in the past, where there's a sales guy that'll go out and sell the job and make a commission, then the technician would go out and do the job and not make the commission. They're like, well, he's getting paid for nothing other than selling while we're doing all the work.
Yeah, like I think it's important in a team environment to realize that every part of the team is required. It's like saying, I don't need the defense because we score all the touchdowns, or we get all the points, but you got to have a defense. And so I think the understanding the culture around that is usually fostered by having open book management, actually letting the technicians see the numbers of the business, seeing what the commissions are for the salespeople. That sort of open book management fosters the trust required for the team to be able to know that the estimators are looking out for their best interest. For example, if someone's concerned about that, compensate your estimators based upon accuracy of budgeted hours. So that way the crew knows that, like, hey, the estimator is getting paid better if I get this job done faster. That means there's going to be better job notes. They're going to make sure that the expectation of the customers are set correctly in order to make sure that they set the crew up for success. So you're always trying to ask yourself, like, if I incentivize this, will actually create a perverse incentive? Will actually hurt the next part of the chain? So if I incentivize my people on the phone based upon close ratio, is that going to set up my estimator or sales or technician in a bad light? Because now they're over promising, under delivering, or saying all this stuff on the phone just to get the sale. So I'm always trying to think about, like, how do I incentivize an estimator, someone that's not producing the work, based upon the same thing as the team, which is I want the job to be done efficiently and to the customer satisfaction. And that's the quantity and quality kind of conversation. And so if that was a problem and there was an animosity, I'd simply start compensating my estimators based upon whether or not the job was done efficiently by the crew.
When you talk about open book pricing, how much of the books do you open, or do you encourage your counsel your franchisees or whatever? Yeah, in relation to, I know that's like a lot of people like, oh yeah, I'm not going to open up all the books to team. Like,
yeah, I think it's funny. People will say that they don't want to open up everything to their team, and then on the flip side, they want them to trust them, and so and they want them to work hard. And I think the thing that kind of puts a nail in this is like, okay, I will likely work harder for the person that I like. If I had to choose between someone I like and someone I don't like, I will probably work harder for the person that I like. If I'm an employee, if I am a member of society, if I'm a family member, if I'm in a relationship, I will work harder for the person I like. Well, what's the number one way to make sure someone doesn't like you? Make sure you hide things from them. And so if you're trying to foster trust and you're wondering why your crew isn't working like an owner, or they're not being efficient, why won't they do what I tell them to do? They're always dragging their feet. Maybe they don't like you, and maybe they don't like you because you are hiding things from them. And so I would look at that as from like a very 30,000 foot view. I would also say, show me an instance, like give me a really good example as to why to not show your numbers. You say, well, we're losing tons of money. Well, I can guarantee you, if you're losing lots of money and you're not sharing that with your team, they think you're making money hand over fist. And they'll look for evidence like you got more trucks, you got more equipment, you're hiring more people, as evidence that you're just crushing it. When in reality, you might be losing money like crazy. Now, that one is like, hey guys, this is where it's at. It's a bad spot. We got a long hill to climb here. Like, this is the underdog, coach in the locker room type situation story, the pep talk. Now, if you're making a ton of money, you're just making money hand over fist. Well, how can I share the numbers? Because and I've been in both of these scenarios. How do I actually walk in front of my team? I work a 1 hour or less in this business. I make 5 times as much of them in terms of take home pay, and they are working 40, 60 hours a week out in the field. How is that fair? How do I actually do that? I don't want to hide. I don't want to share anything. I want to hide stuff. Okay. In this case, I would say this. First off, give them a path to make more money inside the business and say, hey, here's how I got where I'm at. I'm going to give you the exact same path. So we actually have this thing in Augusta called the 3F program, franchise fee forgiveness. It's basically, if you work for 2 years out in the field, you can become a franchisee for free. And the reason we do that is because when an owner is making a bunch of money, they can point to their team members, hey, you can do the exact same thing I'm doing. And so now it becomes a matter of, I want to make as much profit as possible to hopefully encourage and motivate my crew enough to go do something more in their life, to hopefully go to the next stage of their career. And I'm also going to give them a piece of the action. So if I'm making money hand over fist, I'm going to give them a piece of the action, because guess what? Now they're incentivized to do what I need more of, which is make more profit. And so if you want more of something, incentivize the team to get more of it. And so if you I want to make more profit, but I want to share anything with them, if you just gave them a piece of the profit, they'd still want you to make more money because they're now incentivized to do so. And so I have yet to find someone that gives a really good argument as to why you should never share anything out the business. We share our rates, we share customers' client information, we share everything. And yes, will be very small parts of the business that you might be nervous about, or someone might misuse against you or say something weird or strange, or they leave the business, they say bad stuff to customers. Yes, that can happen. But the overwhelming majority of the feedback that's received from the team, from the business, and from the results of the company is many times positive.
Is there a scenario where you would incentivize technicians on selling a thing, like an actual product, as opposed to labor? For example, the plumber installs a hot water heater as an addition, or the air conditioning guy installs an extra split system unit instead of just the one that he was called out to do, or something along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. We call those upsells. Some people call them cross sells, depending on what services you're offering. But we're going to usually we give a flat dollar amount per upsell. You could also do something like where it's like, hey, if you get the extra water heater, you get X amount. Or if you do this certain upsell, I'd probably just try to make it as simple as possible.
Sure.
And especially if you're not super trusting around giving pricing information to your team. And I don't mean trusting in terms of open book management as much as their ability to accurately price a job. Because you might have estimators to do that, but then I still want the technicians that are actually interacting with the customers to be incentivized to upsell. So at least get them in front of a salesperson. We absolutely are incentivizing that.
Well, I think the other variable that comes into play there is the fact that often those prices change. Like they're quite volatile up and down depending. I know there's a huge plumbing supply chain out here in Australia, very very probably the biggest one. And they've got this super clever algorithm within their stores. So not the actual the overall business as well, but then the stores have this model where if at a certain time of day they're not on track to be hitting their daily KPI in terms of turnover, the algorithm adjusts the pricing of the products. And so people come in, and if they don't know any better, they're paying more for it than they would have in the morning. It's really clever. It's super sneaky.
Interesting.
But I won't name it, but for obvious reasons. But anyway, the reason I asked that is because I know you were saying a lot about performance pay is largely based on the hourly rate, which makes sense, and a lot of guys will have an incentive model in place for selling a certain product. But then I guess, like you say, if it's a flat fee, and then that will have a labor component regardless, so everything should be fine.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. This has been great. I love it. What haven't we covered?
Yeah, I think the big chunk of it is like, how do you roll this out? I think a lot of people they hear that this is a great model, this is fantastic, this sounds good, but like X, Y, and Z reasons I can't do it. So I'd say two things. First off is, I have free training on this. You don't have to pay for a penny of it. It just go to mikeandrews.com/P4P. It's all free training. It's a free course. It'll walk you through all this stuff. The second thing is, I would say, is you want to roll this out in a very controlled fashion so you don't lose the trust of the team. And so first, what you want to do is just track it. Just track it without even telling them. Like, track how much revenue they produce per day for the business. Track if you give them what percentage, do they actually start making more on P4P than they do in their hourly rate? Because like the big challenge everyone has is like, well, what percentage of labor revenue do I give them? It's easy to go back to last year and look at how much of your revenue went out to direct labor. That's a good place to kind of generally start. So if 20% of your revenue last year went out to direct labor, that might be a decent place to start in terms of tracking what percentage of labor revenue goes to the employees. So I'd start there. Just start tracking how much revenue are people producing, how many budget hours, depending if you do labor revenue or if you do budget hours, track those. How much are they doing per day? And then what percentage of that do I need to give them in order for them to make above a certain base pay or what they're making now?
How would you track that for positions within the business that are not necessarily tied to a specific sale as a deliverable? For example, if you've got like an office administration lady or person, like how would you then apply that same sort of framework to something that's not as obvious as cash collected?
Yeah, so in our system of like P for P in the software we built, it definitely does not fit there. Like it's much more for labor is what we do. However, it's a matter of like what are the KPIs I want to. Like ultimately, all you're doing with labor and with P for P is you're incentivizing efficiency. That's all we're doing, right? Because I've identified the KPI that I want this labor to do is be efficient. So I'm going to incentivize efficiency. How many budget hours you complete? There you go. When it comes to someone on the phone, it's like, well, what are the KPIs they care about? Is it their close ratio? Is it their response rate? Is their speed to answer? What are the things that I'm really looking at that I know if they would do well in those areas, it would lead to the final result that I want in the business? And it's not always profit. For someone on the phone, you might only care about them answering the phone fast. So you would want to incentivize that. You might only care about them closing more jobs on the phone. Well, then you incentivize close ratio. And so it's like, what do you want from this position? And if it's efficiency, if it's bottom line profit from like more of a manager level, or something like an input of close ratio or answer rate, these would be the type of things I'd be looking at to get that KPI as close to compensation as possible.
Have you ever done the labor efficiency rate calculation exercise with essentially when you look at the business as a whole and you can break down the like each individual have a number represented based on the size of the business and things like that. And I know a lot of incentives, especially when it's like not obvious client facing cash collected sort of positions within a business, or can remunerate based on that performance. Like this is the labor efficiency rate. This is what the company needs to be hitting in order for you guys to be making a commission based on anything that comes in above that, kind of in line with what you were saying earlier in the conversation.
Yeah, so we call it our labor efficiency. It's mostly for the crew, though. So there are metrics we have in terms of like figuring your break even per hour of labor, in baking in like overhead, admin, sales, etc.
Right.
One thing we really focus on though is the labor efficiency, and all we do for that is like the budget hours, how long we think the job should take, divided by the clocked hours. So, for example, if we think a job should take 8 hours and it takes and it's going to take 10, so it'd be 8 divided by 10, then an 80% efficiency rate. And so we're always looking at, are you over 70%? And so that would essentially mean that on a 10-hour day, I was actually producing revenue for 7 hours. And that's kind of like our benchmark. Anything below 50, the business will almost never make money. Anything above 90, those are usually the most profitable home service businesses I see. With that efficiency score, which is budget hours divided by clocked hours, is over those kind of like metrics there.
Sure. Yeah. Again, I guess like easy to measure in those scenarios, harder to measure when you've got positions that are not specifically tied to start the clock now, end the clock now. What was their allocation initially? But yeah, I like it. For businesses out there that like this concept, they're wanting to embrace and adopt it, but they're looking for, I suppose, like the starting point and how to. And when I say starting point, I'm talking, I suppose, structurally to move from what they're currently doing to get the team on board. What are the things they need to get dialed in before they can take it to the team and say, hey, this is what we want to do. This is how it's going to work.
Yeah, so you're going to definitely want accurate estimates, because if those are off, you're just going to lose over and over and over the trust of your team. And so a lot of times when someone's getting ready for P4P, what they actually will need to do is simplify services. They'll need to standardize their products, because by having so much complexity and customization, it's harder and harder to get accurate estimates. And so simplification and standardization is probably the first step. And then by having something that's simple and standard, I can create a system for pricing, a system for estimates that is more accurate.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, it's kind of like I'll take like different verticals into into this example, but we've got we kind of do a similar thing where we have like a pricing model built out for like roofers, for example, right? And although I don't like it, it's kind of based on a square meter rate, which is easy, right? Because it's easy to standardize that. It's like, what's the square meter rate for this? The sheets, what's the square meter rate for the guttering? And then it can kind of just spit out a projection based on that. And I don't like it because I think sometimes there's variables that come into play there. Although it can give them a number, we still like for them to be able to, okay, well, what's the variable here that we need to include as a percentage? Like, is the roof pitch higher than expected? Is the access no good? Like things that are not obvious, just. And then there's other models which say take bathroom renovations and kitchen renovations and things like that, where it's all variable. Like the entire thing is a variable. It's very hard to standardize that. It's like, well, we want this toilet, not that one, and that one's $500 more, or whatever it might be, right? So I love the idea of simplifying and standardizing. I think it's a little bit more conducive to some than others. Maybe on the estimating side of things, it's not so bad, but I think when the actual quoting comes into play, it can jump around a bit. What's your feedback on that?
Yeah, I think that's why a lot of times, like things that are very, very custom, for example, like your bathroom remodel, most of the time, not most of the time, but a lot of times you either have ballpark estimates or you have like an hourly rate. It's like, hey, we'll charge you materials plus, or with materials and X amount per hour. And I think that's where P4P isn't super helpful, because if you're getting paid an hourly rate, being more efficient doesn't really do anything. But this is also why I see a lot of those industries being dominated by solo operators. People that just work for themselves, start to having employees. It's very hard to create systems around things that are complex and are custom. And so most of the time, those industries that require customization on every single level, they require complex systems and knowledge on different topics, they usually will go to smaller outfits or people that are just getting started. It doesn't usually go to a company that has 10, 15, 20 employees out in the field, because I need to create systems, and to create systems, I want simple, I want standardized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I like that. All right, cool. Look, let's wrap this one up. Conscious of your time, but thank you so much. This has been like a fantastic conversation. I hope you guys got something out of that. I know, like, as I say, like we've had so many conversations in the past about this topic, and without a really defined way to sort of deliver on it. And so we've kind of been exploring this a lot. So it's been timely that you've been able to share your wisdom with us on this, and much appreciated, especially from someone with the caliber of, business exposure that you have through all the different, franchisees that you work alongside. So that's good aggregate data there, which I thank you very much for. Before we wrap this episode up, where's the best place for people to get hold of you?
Yeah, in this vein, I'd say just mikeandys.com/P4P. We have a free course on this whole topic. So if there's any like, well, what about this? And what about this? Almost guarantee you it's in the course. It's completely free. You don't have to just buy anything. I also have a book I'll give it away for free too. Just from the website, you can fill out a form and I'll send it to you. Actually, Australia, I don't know if I'll be able to. I shouldn't say that. Okay, I shouldn't say that.
Come on, mate.
To your audience, I don't know if I can send books over to Australia. Goodness. Yeah, mercy, goodness. So just check out the course. and all the information's in there.
So it's mikeandys.com/P4P.
Yep.
/P4P. All right, I'm just putting that in the show notes. So you guys, you haven't got to pull over and write that down. It'll all be in the show notes. So you can just head across to siteshed.com, search Mike Andys, ANDES, and that'll pop up there, that link. Mike, we're going to come back in a following conversation, and we're going to dive a little bit into how you can leverage social media to grow a business. I'm looking forward to that conversation. Also, again, something that's pretty close to home for us. So, mate, thanks again for your time. Much appreciated. And for you guys out there, that is a wrap. New Zealand-based home renovation company, 6,593% ROAS. Sydney-based solar company, 2,700% ROAS. Hunter region-based bathroom renovation company, 5,616% ROAS. Melbourne-based building company, 13,182% return on ad spend. Adelaide-based solar company, 2,881% return on ad spend. Guys, the list goes on and on. If you're a trade-based business and you work with projects like roofing, solar, bathroom renovations, kitchen renovations, anything like that, head across to tradie.wiki/pod for podcast. Tradie.wiki/pod for podcast. Book in a conversation. It is game changing.